the whole idea of the Footsteps of Jesus trip was to follow chronologically as best possible the archeologically verifiable sites of Jesus' life. And so we didn't, because of transport logistics going north and south in Israel, it wasn't quite that, but I've arranged the slides or the photos in that way. And so this first, we arrived in Jerusalem and stayed for the first period of time in the Old City, and that was a view from where we were staying, and that gold dome is the Dome of the Rock, so that's how close we were to everything in the city, which is small. And then literally about 3 minutes walk away was the Western Wall there, and that was taken, I think, on Jewish Passover on the Friday night, so there's masses of people, Orthodox Jews, down there praying at the Western Wall. And we were in a group of about 24 people, and the guy that led it was the guy that's in the middle there, Bob Ronglian, and so it wasn't just a tour like you go and visit places, but you'd go and visit a site, you'd read the scriptures, there'd be some teaching and discussion and prayer about the things that happened in that place. And so we didn't see everything. Like if you go on a tour of Israel, there's lots of things you see that to do with the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, but we didn't see lots of those, but we focused on the ones that were in the life of Jesus. But we did do some stuff that was around, well, what were some of the people that were and groups that were important in the life of Jesus, in the time of Jesus, and that included the Romans, who were the military overlords, the Herodians, who were the local overlords, the Sadducees, who were the temple rulers, and the Pharisees, who were the committed followers of the law. Then there were the Essenes, who were the people who were really sticklers for how the temple should work, and then there was the Zealots, who thought that the Pharisees weren't committed enough, they should be committed to violence as well. And so we saw some of those places, including this one, which looks just like a hill, right? But if you thought it was just a hill, it's called Herodium. You would be wrong, because actually it was a hill, but the very top of the hill was dug out and turned into a fortress by Herod the Great, the same Herod the Great that did the killing all the infants in Bethlehem. So we got to go up into that fortress, and that's a photo of the excavation of the inside of it, and that's just south of Jerusalem. We also went down to the Dead Sea, and where the Essenes were, and they were the ones that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. You've probably heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, that's a photo there of some of the caves in which the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And they were hidden there because the Essenes, the Romans, were coming through, and they were going to they were killing all of the rebellious Jews, and so they hid those scrolls in pottery containers in those caves, and they were discovered in the 1940s. Pretty amazing. So that's like the setting of the scene of the life of Jesus. Then this is a contemporary church in Nazareth. It's called the Church of the Annunciation. It's built over the ruins of a Crusader church, which was built in the 1100s or something, and that was built over the ruins of a Byzantine church, which was built in the 300s or 400s, and that was built over the ruins of a first century house where Mary grew up. And so this is the under the church, where the church is, and this is where you can get to go and see. There was a cave, and that's the cave which is like the free back room of the house that Mary grew up in. And it's called the Church of the Annunciation because that's where it marks where the angel appeared to Mary and said, blessed are you among women, etc. And so that's a picture of the cave at the back of the house, and then there's another cave right next to it, which was a Jewish ritual bath and then became a place for Christian baptism. And if you look carefully, you can see here there's a Chi-Rho symbol, which is the Greek letters for Christ. So that's where the beginning of the earthly life of Jesus happened. So obviously then Jesus was born in Bethlehem, and there's a big church there. Again, there's been layers and layers of churches built over the centuries as they've been destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt. And but at the back end of that there is a cave, and that's looking down into the cave, which is the cave that marks the place where Jesus was actually born. Again, that cave was the back room of a house that existed, and there's good archaeological evidence that was most likely the place where Jesus was born, if not somewhere very near there. We don't know where the shepherds were on the hills, but that's what the hills look like today. And there's a chapel that's built there, and one of the place Roman Catholic chapel, and it's really impressive. Like, it's a small chapel, but instead of it, like, there's this glass ceiling, so you've got light streaming in, and we stood in there and sang some "Hark the Herald Angels" things Christmas carols, which is pretty special. Then this is probably for me one of the most amazing places. So we get back up into Nazareth now, because we've got the Annunciation of Jesus to Mary, then we've got the birth of Jesus, and then they go down to Egypt, and then they come back to Nazareth. And this place here is called the Sisters of Nazareth. It's a convent. It was started to be built in the late 1800s. And when they were excavating, they found underneath it some ruins. And the most impressive ruin is this. And it doesn't look like much, but it's most likely the front door of the house Jesus grew up in. And so Jesus walked through that door for 25 years of his life. And I just found that amazing, to be there in that place. And below it, there is a tomb with a rolled stone. We don't know exactly. It is 1st century, but maybe it's the tomb that Jesus and his brothers built for their father when he passed away. Maybe not, but there's a chance that it was. And if Jesus didn't live in that particular house, it was one very like it. But again, there was the remains of Byzantine and other churches that were built on that place to mark that place. And they know that because at least in the 200s AD, there were descendants of the family of Jesus still alive. And when you live in places like that, people remember, oh, that's their house. You know, you go to small villages in England or whatever, oh yeah, that house belongs to that family for the last 300 years or whatever. So there's good reason to have a high degree of confidence about that. In the middle of Nazareth, they've built a thing called the Nazareth Village, which is like a 1st century theme park where they've reconstructed what life was like, you know, so with vineyards and all those sorts of things. But when they were doing the excavating, they actually found this. And this is a wine press from the 1st century. So this is literally like 100 metres from where Jesus' house was. And so he probably ran through this farm when he was growing up, playing with his mates. Then Jesus adult life, he went down to the Jordan River down near Jericho and was baptised in the Jordan River. And then he went into the wilderness for 40 days, and that's the sort of wilderness he went into, where there's a high degree of confidence that he actually went to Wadi Kelt, because that's the only place where there's a sustained water available. And that's where he was tempted about his identity. If you are the Son of God, if you are the Son of God. And he was able to win that wrestle. Jesus went back into Galilee to do his ministry. And this is a photo of the north end of the Sea of Galilee. And basically, within that photo is almost all of the places of Jesus' Galilean ministry that's referred to in the Gospels. So this is a bit of a wider picture of the Sea of Galilee. But yeah, this is where it all happened. In Capernaum, there is you might even read it on the right there. It says a late 4th century AD white synagogue. So that's these white stones up here. And they're built on these black basalt stones, which is the 1st century synagogue, which is the one that Jesus walked into and the demon cried out and he cast out the demon. And so this is the updated level, but that's the size of the synagogue where that event from the Gospels happened. And literally like 50 metres away from there is where Peter and Simon and Andrew's house was. And like almost everywhere in Israel, they've built a church over it. But they've built it around it. But the ruins of it are a bit, and I've shown photos like this before, that like this is what the house was like. It was a house built around a courtyard. And then there was a main room, and then most of the roofs were flat, and so you'd have a row of stairs to get up onto the flat roofs in the summer. And so when Jesus came back to the house in Capernaum and there was no room, people walked up the stairs, dug a hole in the roof, let down the crippled man. So that's where that happened. And next photo is inside that octagonal church looking down at the ruins of the place where Jesus' home base in Capernaum was. We went out on a boat on the Sea of Galilee, a bit like that one, and we sang some songs and talked about things. But back in the late 80s, they actually discovered a boat buried in the mud from the 1st century. And it was so delicate they had to sort of infuse it with polymer and other things, otherwise it just would have disintegrated. But they restored it like that. And this gives you a sense just with the people. That's the sort of boat that Peter and James and John went fishing on. There's no knowledge that that's the actual boat, because who knows, but that's the sort of boat that existed in the first century that was used on the Sea of Galilee. Then there's up on a mountain, there's another church, which is the Church of the Beatitudes, which is where they don't know where exactly the Sermon on the Mount happened, but it's somewhere around there. It's a mountain in that area, so we went and saw that. Then we headed north to Caesarea Philippi, and this is Mount Hermon in the distance. And this is where Jesus took his small group on retreat just before they went to Jerusalem. And this is the place where Jesus said, "Who do you say that I am?" And people say this and that. And Jesus says, "You're Peter, and on this rock." So he said, "Peter, you're a pebble, and on this rock," the revelation of who Jesus was, he'll build his church. So then Jesus heads down towards Jerusalem. This next photo is the church that commemorates the life of Lazarus, and then there's a tomb that you visit that is thought to be the tomb that Lazarus was in, at least the first time. We went and had a look in there. He definitely wasn't there. And that Lazarus is in Bethany, which is, if you got to Jerusalem, you go east from Jerusalem and you go up over the Mount of Olives down to Bethany. And so when you're coming back from Bethany, you go up on the top of the Mount of Olives, and this is one of the churches that's built on the top of Mount of Olives. And the interesting thing about this is you can see all of those sort of words on the side walls. This church has the Lord's Prayer in languages from all around the world. And so there's even English, funnily enough. And so you can just walk around and see all the different languages that there. And from near there, you look out over the city of Jerusalem, and that's the Temple Mount area. And that Temple Mount is massive. It's like the size of 25 rugby or soccer football fields, not AFL ones, but 25. And where the Dome of the Rock is where the second temple would be. And in that area, in that courtyard area, is where Jesus did this cleansing of the temple. And so this is the road down which Jesus would have ridden on the donkey when he was coming down the Mount of Olives into Jerusalem. And you can see it this is from the Temple Mount. That curved road in the middle is the one, and it's really quite steep. I walked down there singing an old Michael W. Smith song, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna, Hosanna." At the south end of the Temple Mount are these stairs, and that's where people would walk up to go onto the Temple Mount. Now, there were a series of doors that were built on that, and over here they've been bricked up, right? But this is a zoomed in picture here, and so that stone is first century stone, and so Jesus probably walked on that stone going up through what's the blocked in wall to go up onto the Temple Mount. That's how everybody went in and out of the temple. And as I said, it is massive. So this is just a picture of what it's like up there. Now, we know that when Jesus cleansed the temple, it was probably a symbolic act, not a major act. Because when there was a serious major act, like when Paul got into an argument with the Jews in Acts, then on the corner of the Temple Mount, there were a bunch of soldiers in a fortress, and they had stairs that they could race down from the Temple Mount like a rapid reaction force to quell anything. And this one here is a picture of that fortress. Now, there's no record of the Romans rushing down to quell a riot when Jesus is overturning the table. So he's doing it in a prophetic, symbolic way in a small corner of the temple in a way that doesn't make everybody so nervous that they have to bring in the Roman soldiers. Southwest of the Temple Mount area is a house that is marked as the tomb of King David, but actually it's the house of John Mark and his mother, who was from a wealthy family, and John Mark is the guy who wrote the Gospel of Mark, and his uncle Barnabas is known from his involvement with Paul in the book of Acts. And this is the house where they lived. And there was that niche in the corner there, that sort of semicircular one, that or something like it was an early Christian place of worship, because this is the house where they most likely had the Last Supper. It's most likely where Jesus appeared to them after the resurrection. It's also most likely the place where Pentecost happened. It's also the house where, when Peter was miraculously released from prison, remember? And he went and knocked on the door, and they went to the door and they thought he was a ghost rather than actually Peter. Well, that's this house. Now, there is above that, there is an upper room that was built, but that's like a Crusader thing that was built 1,000 years ago. But that gives you an idea there is an upper room there. Then there's also Gethsemane. So this is the place where Jesus went and travailed in prayer before he was arrested, and there's a church there, and then there's olive trees, and there's the rock that people typically thought this is the place where Jesus was actually threw himself down on this rock. Jesus was arrested there, taken to the house of a high priest, and then after that he was taken to what today is called David's Citadel, but it was the fortress or the palace where Pilate would have lived when he was in Jerusalem, and where the trial with Pilate happened. And that's the Jaffa Gate, actually. That's on the main entrance into the old city of Jerusalem. And from there, Jesus was taken outside of the city walls as it were at that time to an old quarry. And this is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which covers both Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified, and the tomb where Jesus was lain. When Constantine became emperor in the 300s and became a Christian, he sent his mother to the Holy Land to find all of the holy sites. And this place was inside the city walls and covered and had been built over. But the people in Jerusalem knew, there was historical memory, no, this is where it happened. And so they excavated it, and they found a quarry, and it was a quarry, and in the middle was a section of rock that was a mound that was not suitable for being used for stone. It was the stone the builders rejected. And it was on this rock that Jesus was crucified in full view of the public. Now, they've encased the rock because people would go and like to try and keep bits off it to take it back home. A bit like if you're at the Western Wall, the Berlin Wall, right? But you can, and we went there on 2 occasions, you can kneel down under that altar there and put your hand through and touch the rock in which Jesus' cross was slotted. And that's a pretty meaningful thing to do. And on the side, this is a photo of what the rock actually looks like. You can see it's no good for actually building. And literally 15 metres away from there were, around the edge of the quarry, there were tombs that had been cut into the edge of the quarry, like this one here. And there was a place where the bodies would be laid. Then after a year, when they were just bones, they'd be put together and then slotted into the niches, like in the back of that photo. But when Queen Helena found this area with the tomb where Jesus was raised from, they excavated all around it, so it was like a standalone tomb, and you could be all around it, and they built a church around it. And then several hundred years later, someone came through and destroyed that tomb, but the base of that tomb is still there. And they recently did that bit there is like the stone thing that surrounds the tomb where Jesus was laid and from which he was raised. And they recently restored it, and there's clear evidence that it goes back to that period of time. Although it's just like the base of the tomb is left, the sides of it are no longer there because they were destroyed by someone. But that place is enclosed in a massive dome with a light at the top with light shining through, and it's an amazing place to be. The earthly life of Jesus. And we were privileged to follow in his footsteps there, and we get to follow in his footsteps here.